Now for a quick disclaimer. Nothing you see or hear on the flight deck is investment advice. Nothing said today is intended as investment advice. Those participating in today's discussion may have bought, held, and/or sold the stocks discussed today prior to today's discussion and/or may do so afterwards. Remember, you are responsible for your own investment decisions, and if in doubt, you should seek advice from an independent financial advisor. Stocks can be high risk, and you may lose the entire amount you have invested. Please now sit back and enjoy the flight.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Frank Richards. I'm the president of the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation, and our mission is really about commercializing the tremendous resources of natural gas on the North Slope. So when we saw this Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential executive order, it was almost like it was written for us. And so we greatly appreciate not only Governor Dunleavy's support in driving forward that this Alaska LNG project will be transformational for the state of Alaska, but also in his conversations with President Trump, that this project is truly one that will value and provide great benefit to America. So the Alaska LNG project is the only energy project singled out and prioritized by President Trump, reflecting the project's singular importance for achieving national strategic priorities, including allowing Alaskans to access the benefit of our own North Slope natural resources. And for that, we greatly appreciate President Trump's support. The executive orders cite Alaska LNG's critical national importance and economic and national security benefits. And President Trump has directed the U.S. government to prioritize the development of Alaska's liquefied natural gas potential, including the sale and transportation of Alaska LNG to other regions of the United States and allied nations within the Pacific region. By taking an all-of-a-government approach, this order aligns the full force and weight of the federal government in support of Alaska LNG, prioritizing agency action on future permitting needs or renewals, promoting Alaska LNG to our Pacific allies, turning away from Russian gas, prioritizing Alaska LNG in international trade talks, and utilizing Alaska LNG for military and defense needs. This order facilitates successful commercial negotiations by informing counterparties that the federal government views Alaska LNG as a favorable geostrategic trade asset factoring into international trade and security discussions. Alaska LNG is the only federally authorized LNG export project on the west coast of North America, delivering direct canal-free access through uncontested waters to Asia allies, looking to turn away from Russian gas and lowering emissions by switching to cleaner burning Alaska natural gas. The broader actions reflected in these executive orders for resource development in Alaska are all underpinned by the affordable, reliable, and long-term natural gas provided by Alaska LNG. Alaska LNG is the foundation for Alaska's domestic energy security and the nation's strategic natural resources from Alaska. AGDC looks forward to working closely with the Trump administration and Governor Dunleavy as we developed Alaska LNG to give Alaskans and our Pacific allies access to Alaska's abundant and economic clean-burning natural gas.
Our proactive newsroom, and joining me now is Jay Cheatham. He is the CEO of Pantheon Resources. And Jay, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Oh, Steve, it's always great. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Thank you.
Yeah, and also joining us is your technical director, Bob Rosenthal. Bob, great to see you as well.
Good to see you too.
So, Jay, let's start with you. You had a big announcement out from the company today along your Megrez 1 well, and exciting news for the company. Why don't you remind everyone a little bit about what that well is and really what the announcement was today?
Yeah, so that's a well drilling into our eastern topsets east of the Dalton Highway and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. And the top line basically is we see an increase in the resource from our pre-drill estimate of 609 million barrels to increase by 15 to 50% over that pre-drill estimate in the upper Schrader Bluff and the Prince Creek zones. And Steve, this is a well that Bob has wanted to drill ever since we merged the companies in 2019.
Yeah, Bob, let's talk about what you saw in this particular well and really give us sort of the technical view of what we're talking about today.
Well, if you could flash back to Jay for 1 second.
Yeah.
Because I love Jay's background picture.
I'll get out of the way so you can see it a little better.
So if you look back there's a feature called the Franklin Bluffs. And I think if in the past, if it would, the person who named that had called it the Franklin Fold, it would have been a lot more of the geologic community would have been kind of saying, hey, there's something really interesting going on here. And what we have is a very big structural feature sitting there, a big fold sitting in the Foreland Basin. And that was the first thing that attracted us to this years and years and years ago, trying to understand what was going on. And the fact that we had done a massive amount of geochemical analysis of all the source rocks. And in particular, we believe that fold was sitting on top of the HRZ source rock where it was in peak oil generation, which is if you're an explorer, it gives you two out of three of the criteria of like drill a well here. So we were been excited about that for a very, very long time. The well has confirmed that we are that these source rocks are in peak oil generation. We've had that analysis from the isotube data. The really, really excellent work done by AHS on our cuttings analysis is telling us the different reservoirs have oil in them as well. Our log analysis is telling us that, and as Jay has alluded to, our original target look like they're hydrocarbon bearing. We've got a couple of other zones above those original targets that we thought might be hydrocarbon bearing when we drilled the well, but we had not put those into the resource. They look like they're hydrocarbon bearing, and there's a potential for a few other zones above what we call the Prince Creek, and they might be hydrocarbon bearing also. And we're working on the analysis as we speak to make that decision. But right now, it's in our prognosis to probably test even those zones as well. So,
Yeah,
very, very big program.
yeah, 15% upgrade in resource volume. That's pretty interesting announcement. That's a whopper one.
Well, first of all, the P50, we sort of our most likely case was already 600 million barrels, which is huge. We would have been, that would have been a fantastic result in and of itself. So yeah, it's looking very positive. Now we got to get out there and test the wells. Test the zones in this well.
Yeah, and Jay, that's really the next steps now, right? Is to do that the testing that you need to do to sort of make sure you're on the right track here.
Yes, Steve. So as Bob mentioned, we will do 4 tests in the lower part in the Lower Prince Creek, and 2 in the Upper Schrader Bluff. These zones, we have better permeability and porosity, so our testing protocols will be different than we've done in our other wells. They don't need the same kind of stimulation that we've done previously, so we're working on a different protocols for these. And then, as Bob mentioned, we've got potentially 3 zones even above the Upper Prince Creek that once we do some more diagnostics, we may choose to test those zones as well. And those look pretty exciting from what we've seen so far.
And lastly, Jay, just on getting to this particular point, I know it's a lot of work from Bob and his team, a lot of work from you and your team. It's a really strong day for Pantheon Resources.
Yes, it really is, and the market has done its job, and they see what we see so far, and there's actually potentially a lot more to come, Steve.
All right, we'll leave it there. Bob, thanks so much. Great to see you again, and appreciate your time today.
Sure. Thank you.
And as always, Jay, good to see you as well, my friend.
You too again, Steve. Thanks.
All right, Bob Rosenthal, Technical Director, Jay Cheatham, the CEO, both with Pantheon Resources.
Well, hello, and welcome again. We thought we would jump on and have a quick call, as it's been such an interesting week. We have on the call this evening, we have Alaskageophiz, we have Sporazene, and we have Roberto joining me. So thanks, guys. Wow, what a week it's been. Who wants to take us through it? So many things to talk about.
Well, it's been an incredible week. I don't think you could have scripted it any better if you tried, really. Overnight Monday, we had the executive order came through, which was pretty good, really, in terms of the wording around unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. I think some really interesting comments from the president there, which gave us all quite a lot of hope and optimism, I think, and just reinforces, I think, where the Gasline project is going. Hot on the heels of that was the company announcement on Wednesday morning, which pretty much blew everybody away in terms of expectations around what we discovered at Megrez, and then we had obviously Jay and Bob do their interview, which I think everybody really enjoyed. I thought it was great to see Jay and Bob looking so happy about the results. Finally, we had Governor Dunleavy did his press conference, which was a bit more of a commentary on the executive order that President Trump signed. So we've had all of that to digest over the course of the week, and I would say unforgettable, really. Yeah, amazing week.
So busy we forgot about David Hobbs's presentation as well. We almost had something every day.
Yeah, and I guess there was also at the landmine chap, Jeff, who's quite a character, and he had an interview with Frank Richards from the AGDC, and I thought that was a really, really good chat, actually. I think Jeff does a good job of kind of unearthing some interesting comments from people. That was quite a good listen. But wow, it's felt like one thing after another. And yet for so long, I think we've been aware of the potential of this investment. As you say, Sporazene, it's just seems to be laying out in the most perfect way imaginable. So should we just go through that list then? The executive orders. I mean, it's a PR dream, right? If you've got the president issuing executive orders to basically give a wish list. If Alaska could write a wish list, this would be it.
It was incredible. I mean, I just read through this, went on and on about everything that Alaskans have griped to the U.S. government about for years and years. And, again, some things were, relatively small, like an airport to a small native village that can't get out during emergencies to their airstrip, to the big things like the Alaska LNG project and, really being pro-development in Alaska. So it was a just amazing day.
I think sort of one of the things Alaskageophiz said, I mean, the specific reference in the executive order to prioritize development of the LNG project, but there was also reference to expediting the permitting process as well for energy and natural resource projects. And, I know that's definitely the kind of long pole in the tent for us in terms of being able to get to production. So I think Frank Richards said for the project, feels like it's been written for us.
Yeah, that was his comment, wasn't it? And I just think the rhetoric around infrastructure projects attaining energy dominance, and there's been some comments about how that will roll out, whether it's kind of the carrot and the stick situation, whether he's offering a carrot in terms of we won't add tariffs onto your exports coming into the US as long as you fall in line, right? As long as you buy our energy. I mean, is that too simple a way of looking at it?
No, I think that's exactly right. The other one is I think he must have had a number of these things negotiated informally before he even started this discussion. I mean, over in Japan, they've already talked about, I think it's SoftBank and other companies doing AI type funding. I think he's setting up, some of the Saudi Arabians for dropping their price in exchange for more investment in the U.S., whether, that's in other energy type projects or not. So I think there's a lot of stuff that he's trying to do, kind of wheel and deal and get some money to flow back into the U.S. for these projects he wants.
But the net result is that the macro picture, which is always good to keep in mind when you make an investment in a company, right, is like, where does this investment sit in its own positioning in its field? Where does this investment sit in sort of general economy, and where does it sit in its macro position in the industry? And so I think we've got those macro wins behind us. Roberto, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of highlights what I guess Justin was saying when we spoke to him last week, that, we're entering a news-rich period. The next couple of months, there's going to be regular updates from both the gas side and probably from the flow testing side as well. And what is quite likely is that everything now is going to be amplified. I'm pretty sure that if Trump is unleashing Alaska Energy, if a company like us was to announce a billion plus discovery and flow tested it, he's probably going to mention it. You know what I mean? He might even take the credit.
Yeah,
it's
he'll want to name it
so
after him, won't he?
exactly, and he can fire on, to be honest, if it gets us out there. But yeah, so this is exactly kind of what Justin was commenting in our last call, I feel, and it's hopefully just the start of it. Tuesday, I think, was David Hobbs, wasn't it? He presented a short piece.
And he was very upbeat. He covered some good material. Again, he kind of reconfirmed light oil, good porosity permeability. It was a very good presentation.
Yeah, no, I thought he spoke very well.
They'd even speeded up the video, so it was like super fast, but it was good. Yeah, so that's good. So in the context of kind of, obviously they did the interview with ourselves the week prior, then that one, there was the conference out in Puerto Rico. He was presenting this week. So it feels like they've stepped up the marketing, right?
Yeah. And I'm hoping it goes back to what Justin says about preparing that American market, Perhaps, a lot of them might be waiting on flow test results, but, they should certainly have heard of it, or more people should certainly have heard of us by the time those flow test results land. And hopefully what will be different this time to last flow test results, you won't have to do any calculations or interpretations from modelling up to horizontal wells before you get higher numbers. Hopefully they'll be there. And it's the first time, I think, on the RNS for the update of the cores that we've heard them say that they're expecting flow rates to be like Willow and Pica fields. So they've been pretty coy until that RNS dropped. So, and rightly so, I think. But they certainly seem confident.
Okay, let's turn to the RNS. I think, Sporazene, you mentioned on a previous RNS drop how your daughter was asking, "Why are you dancing around the kitchen, Daddy?" or something, wasn't it? Well, on this one, I had a similar experience. My daughter were heading off for the school run, and I was in a bit of a flat. We were trying to get ready, as you are sometimes as parents, heading out the door. Have we got the books? Have you got your bag? Have we got the lunch? And gosh, my phone was going off the scale. It was proper blowing up. And I was just I was in a bit of a spin. This is, it's that moment when you think we've talked about the thesis, we've talked about why we invested on sort of a broad brush approach, but then now we're getting into the real detail and we're finding that the drill bits showing us what they've really got. And it was spectacular, wasn't it? I can't find the words to sort of say how much of a sort of wow factor that was. So Alaskageophiz, everyone's probably waiting on what you think. And I know in the Discord chat, it's kind of like, what does Alaskageophiz think? Take us to, do you still, obviously you're a retired industry pro, retired geophysicist. You've seen this kind of stuff. You've been at the wellhead. You've modelled things. You've been at the sharp end of things as it's happening. How did you approach it? Were you excited? Do you still get that buzz? How was it? How did it land for you?
I was blown away. Again, we had a great conversation with David and Justin in the last podcast, and we learned some things. Again, they have to be fairly quiet about things they can't talk about, which included finding 3 additional zones above the other additional zones they didn't expect. So instead of 1,260 feet of potential light oil column, they got up to 2,425 feet of light oil column potentially. Yeah. And again, he said, we've got isotube analysis and other things back now in various videos we've seen of interviews recently, plus the RNS. So the data hasn't come back to say, oh, no, we made a mess of it, and now we don't think the zones pay. They're saying it's just growing. And again, 15 to 50% more potential recoverable resource. So that puts in the 700 to 900 plus million barrels of recoverable oil and liquids. So again, as I said on our last podcast, a giant field is 500 million barrels, and you barely ever find those things. And now we're almost double, and that doesn't include the other top set and other additional zones they haven't even tested yet in the prospect. So it doesn't get better than that. But even funnier, I put out a little search on the internet for some of the wells nearby that I'd never paid much attention to because they're very shallow, not thinking there was a lot of pay there. And I'll probably misspell it or misspeak it, but the West Cadlero Shellick well, which was drilled by Mobil in the 60s, went down just on the edge of the Franklin Bluffs feature, again, the structural high that Bob talks about in the Proactive Investor recent video. And it's a structural fold or structural thrust fault that kind of made a bit of a trap there. But that particular Mobil well went down to about 4,500 and some feet. And when you take away the elevation to get to subsea TVD, that well probably just missed the top of the SAG Vertoc number one zone. So those guys, assuming they're still alive, probably kicking themselves for not drilling that deeper.
They just stopped short.
Yeah.
Wow.
So again, it's an old well. I didn't really have a whole lot of information. I just found a little bit on the website, on the USGS database. But again, it's just incredible that this big feature has sat there since, the dawn of oil exploration up in Alaska, and we're the ones to have had the big discovery. So great stuff.
So they missed it.
We kind of forget. Sometimes you kind of forget with all this great news. Like, we're right underneath the pipeline, absolutely smack right underneath the pipeline, next to the whole road. I mean, it just doesn't get any better.
And I think it was Slim Blokes on our Flight Discord conversation today said, well, using Pythagorean theorem, which I've also used in some of my displays I've shared, if we have a vertical well 3,500 foot down to the surface casing depth setting point, then we go to about a 51, 52 degree angle inclination. If we go to the top of this new formation, the Saginaw Vertoc, that's basically 4,280 foot TVD subsea. But if you look at it from a distance from the original gravel pad where it was drilled, that's about 1,000 foot, and it could even be a little bit less departure if you move the pad a little bit to the north. So basically, it's almost right under the pad, this new potential shallow targets they're finding. So just incredible.
Right. Can I ask a question, GeoPhys? But it looks very easy to us, when you see slides and you see a lot of green and then some red blobs, and you're like, it's pretty obvious. There's the reservoir, the red blobs. What an easy game this is. But obviously, there was commentary about how they missed this play due to the seismic and the shallower depth. I was just wondering if you could explain a bit more about how the seismic is affected by the shallower depth, and you can miss these things.
Absolutely. I'll go off a little bit on a tangent for a second, but the figures you're talking about are amplitude versus offset, where they can create a lithology display, for example, sand versus the background shale. They can also look at it for potentially what is the fluid filling the reservoir, is it oil, gas, or water? But if you've ever had a dog or you've had to rescue a person in the water drowning, let's say you're perpendicular to the person drowning, and you can run faster on land than you can swim. So if you're perpendicular to the feature you want to get to the water, you go straight at it. That's, again, sort of the ray path from a seismic thing that goes straight down to a flat horizon and bounces straight back to the same receiver. But if you're to the side of this person, you're going to run, or your dog's going to run to fetch a stick in the water the shortest, fastest possible way he can do it, or she can do it. So as you get farther away from the object you want to get in the water, the more time you're going to spend running, where you can run fastest on land, and then you angle yourself to run, or actually to swim, to get to the object in the water. So it's, you want to do the least amount of energy to get where you want to go, if that made any sense at all. But what happens is we have permafrost anywhere from about 800, 900 foot thick, about 1,600 foot thick around the Megrez well. And velocities from the seismic vibrators, it's going to go faster through the ice, frozen rock, and slower through the rock that's just beneath it. So what's happened is when you have a shallow reflector, for example, at 4,000 or 5,000 foot, your angles as you're approaching, you don't get the far offset angles you really get at a deeper horizon because you spend a lot of that time traveling through the permafrost sort of more horizontally. And then when it hits the shallow stuff just beneath it, it dives down and goes more vertical. So again, the shallow stuff is really not getting imaged as well as some of the deeper stuff, let's say at 8,000 foot. So again, it's a little technical, and I tried to simplify it probably really poorly, but that's why, again, I think some of these shallow things didn't come out as amplitude versus offset anomalies, as well as some of the deeper stuff does. So again, I think it's a lot of people weren't expecting these things to be charged with oil. They, again, just didn't see the obvious trap. But again, I think this Franklin Bluffs fold, as Bob calls it, is probably what's causing this trap and seal to be there. So ask me another question, because I'm sure I blew that one completely.
No, that was great. And I guess the next question to me would be, do you know of this field elsewhere on the slope, or this type of field?
Yeah, the second Vertok, an old BP discovery, Badami, which is up on the coast, up sort of near Point Thompson and kind of between Point Thompson and Prudhoe. It was in what they call the Flaxman sandstones, or basically the Badami turbidites. And it's far away. It's more marine, but we're going to be more into the near shore to even non-marine stuff here. And if you look at it generally from the middle Schrader Bluff, where our Poon West and the Kodiak stuff is, we're generally dealing with more marine stuff. But as we go uphole into the shallow stuff, all the stuff prograding during the Brookian fence, where you're getting the mountain building, it's kind of coming from the west and the south, but you're getting more and more non-marine stuff, which, because of depth and maximum burial and the grain size, it's all going to have better porosity and permeability as you go uphole, both depositionally and, again, just less compaction. So that's why getting 20 to 25% porosity is not that hard once you get up that depth. And the stuff that they've just announced is the other three zones could even be better.
No, that's great. No, thanks for that explanation. It's good to hear that, it's been seen before.
So we look forward to testing them, I guess, and they've talked about a number of tests, I think 4 10-day tests commencing in Q1, starting at top set 3, then and top set 1, 2 of the tests, and then 2 tests in the Prince Creek. What are your thoughts at Geophiz on when they'll actually be getting started with that work? Did you imply from the RNS that there was a lot more analysis work to do before they were going to get started, or do you think it's a case they'll be getting cracking here in the next week or two?
I think it's sooner than later. I think the thing we learned from our last podcast was interesting, is that they're going to not bring down the Alcade number 2 well testing equipment. Again, he said it was more computerized, more automated. So they're just going to have a rental company come in there with the well testing equipment, do it, as you said, sort of 10-day tests on each zone. So I think it'll happen probably sooner. Again, we're getting towards the end of January, so we're probably talking February sometime.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have to also deal with all the trucking of oil and fluids back and forth. They may have to use the annulus for some of the disposal of fluids like water. But if they're talking about pay so far up, I guess one minor concern I have is, were they able to run cement in their last casing run all the way up above anticipated hydrocarbons? So it depends when they thought that this Saginaw Vertok was considered pay, and did they get cement up above it? They could have to go in there, perhaps do a cement squeeze to get some cement across that if they didn't, which is not impossible. It just could take time and possibly rig to get some of that stuff, or work over rig to get some of that stuff done. So it's going to happen fast, I think. We may not go immediately for a Wall Street type well test where we get the highest flow possible. They want to get some real good pressure, volume, temperature information on the well before it goes below bubble point. So they'll want to perhaps draw some of the perforated zones slowly, low volume, get the good reservoir information they need, and then they can always ramp up the production later. And again, they may test other zones differently where they don't feel like they need the reservoir information anymore, and they can just go to more of a higher flow test.
Right,
So-
and I think really encouraging to sort of hear their expectations of flow rates comparable to Willow and Picker, which I think is stuff that you'd said in previous podcasts as well. So certainly vindicates your opinion of this one from a long way back. And there is the potential of more tests to come as well once they've got through the 4 that they called out in the RNS. So, I mean, hugely exciting I would say, next 2 to 3 months, really, when probably some more information comes through about the very shallowest zones that we just heard about for the first time. And then, of course, we get the flow test starting. But certainly the market reaction's been positive, and we'll continue to see probably some upward pressure on the share price as we get closer to those tests starting.
Yeah, can I just go back to what you said about the testing, GeoFizz? So initially, we're going to test from the bottom up, right? Each section, as you come up, you'll start off slowly getting some good pressure analysis, and then they'll go for a kind of headline flow in each section as you come through the wellbore.
Yes and no. I think, again, they're probably also going to do possibly some pressure buildup tests. So they may do kind of limited flow originally with the perf. They may flow a little harder. Again, they're going to be constrained by a 30-mile haul to dispose of some of the fluids. And then once they get a rate, they perhaps will shut it in and see how the pressure builds up. That'll give them an idea of the container size and a bit of the permeability in the reservoir. Then again, they'll probably have to put some type of plug or possibly even put some cement across the perfs. But they'll isolate those from the next zone and then go up and probably do something very similar. Now, they'll also be getting good information on gas, and obviously the CO2 content comes to mind as something very important to know, plus the gas-oil ratio. I think someone pointed out the other day that this, at least in some of the figures that they've shown at Pantheon, was a little lower gas-oil ratio than perhaps over at Kodiak. I don't know if that's for sure. I thought it was around 5,000 standard cubic feet per barrel of oil, but it was their assumption, but I could be wrong. But it'll be interesting to see. They've always said this is light oil. They haven't backed off on that. So the question will be gas-oil ratio, and again, possibly the CO2 and or helium type numbers, if there's any helium associated.
You think there might be helium from this well as well?
I don't know. I don't think so. But again, I have no idea. It's
You're always looking for helium flight, aren't you?
a pleasant surprise, but I'm certainly no helium expert, so don't listen to me on that one.
Okay, we'll edit that.
Can I ask another question, GeoFizz?
Sure.
We're talking about going up different zones, and there's most of the time there is nothing between the zones. And I'm now starting to, how do they delineate what's lower and when it moves in upper? Because a lot of them seem to be connected. And then the next question based on that would be, what would happen to water if we got higher porosities and permeabilities? You'd be thinking, I guess, that the water would be, over time, went to the bottom of the well. But could there be water interspersed between these zones, as in pooled water, I guess, rather than connate water? So,
well, again, the better quality sands, it's easier to pick out water versus hydrocarbons in very tight, thin bedded rock. It's a little more difficult, but I would think if they saw water or gas, they'd probably know that by this point. Whether they tell us, that's a question, I guess. But it also raises the question, like you said, of how do you determine one zone from the next? On a top set type play, you're looking at prograding shelf margin edge deltas. So typically you have, going from the bottom of the zone, kind of more shales, pro-delta shales, going up towards sandier areas, channels, channel mouth bars, possibly maybe in a little fluvial type sediment being brought in. So again, you're normally seeing a coursing upward sequence, and then when you go to the next formation above that, there's usually at least a capping shale or a gradation to a shale. So how they're actually calling this stuff with such apparent high net to gross is interesting to me, but I haven't seen the logs and I don't know, but they've obviously got some view of how they're breaking this out. Now, I have worked the upper and lower Prince Creek a lot in my past life, and we called it West Sac Schrader Bluff for the lower Prince Creek, and then the Ugnu Formation for the upper Prince Creek. And those are getting transitioning more to kind of going more non-marine as you go up in sections. So the upper Prince Creek could be more non-marine, at least my expectation, and possibly even the lower Prince Creek here, being so far east of the Kapparik and Prudhoe. Some of the stuff we see there, it could also be possibly a little non-marine to near marine type rock. But again, it's all going to be likely better porosity permeability. When they look at the log signatures from the gamma and the resistivity and other curves, they'll see either, kind of blocky looking sands, grading upward, coursing upward sands, or coursing downward sands. So all those things are going to tell them a bit about the depositional environment and how far these events are likely to extend, which is good because you need to now go back to your volumetrics of the Megrez prospect. You've got thickness at one known point, but now you have to spread that over the whole container. And that's where you use 3D seismic and the diagnostic features of what the logs look like to help you with that process.
Yeah, so in terms of setting some kind of a pressure test, that's to determine the size of the container. I mean, what's your feeling? You highlighted in the Discord server the extent of the Franklin Bluff structure, and then drew kind of like a balloon circle around potentially how that structure plays out. I mean, what's your feeling? Does it run to the full extent of that?
Again, you're bringing the sediments mainly in from the west and possibly to the south. So again, I think we're in an optimum spot. Could get more shaly, more offshore as you go to the east. But again, that whole thing could potentially be one large trap. As I said before we got onto the broadcast, if you could collect pressure data from the bottom of our deepest oil zone to the shallowest oil zone, that pressure gradient is going to tell you something relative to hydrostatic or water pressure gradient, whether it's one giant trap or a series of smaller traps, which goes back to the question about, are you going to see some water legs there? And if it's a series of several smaller traps, basically you might see water, come and go, for example, while one big trap, depending on if you're edge or in the middle, it could have just one giant oil column. And again, you could have pressures such that you might have to drill it with maybe 1 pound per gallon mud weight near the top of that, higher than you would normally expect with sort of a normal pressure gradient. So I haven't heard anyone say they had to mud up at the top of this prospective new oil zone, but again, I have no data to say they didn't.
Right, I'm not sure. I've got a number of things firing off there. So overall, do you want to give us just your overview? So you were reading. I just want to humanize this a little bit. So you started reading the RNS in the same way that you did to David on the previous episode as a sports commentator, and you took him down the well. So I want to do that to you. So you open the RNS. And from the top of the RNS, and you start reading down it. Just take us through what you were thinking.
Okay. But first off, again, 3 new zones in a spot that we drilled some wells in the nearby Great Bear, earlier wells that didn't seem to have any significant hydrocarbons, suggest that this has a separate trap than just, regional kind of stratigraphy, pinch outs, things like that. So it goes back to the structure of the Franklin Bluffs. Obviously, without seeing the logs, I have still some uncertainty about, what'll they do. But they've got some pretty professional people, SLB, Schlumberger, the E-size folks, the well cuttings folks at Baker Hughes, the volatile oils analysis group. So again, I'm trusting that they're seeing exactly what they are seeing. The second thing was, they started laying out a well testing program. They're going to work bottoms up, and within a relatively short time, they'll be having some good information that's going to, I'm sure, make the stock more valuable. So again, it's just everything was good. I didn't hear anything that were big red flags out there. The only minor one, I guess, in my mind, is the cementing over the shallow zones. Did they get enough cement up there to be able to do a test now, or do they have to go out and do some remedial action? But that's just my industry experience says look for that.
Yeah. But as to the column height, for us regular Joes, just it was quite astonishing to sort of read those numbers. But did that hit you? Can you put it in perspective in terms of how big this thing potentially is?
Earlier podcast, I think I pointed out Prudhoe's oil column is around 475 foot thick. You go over to the Kuparuk field, you're in the range of 100 plus or minus for their Kuparuk sands. And then, of course, there's Agnew and Westsack and some other stuff, Meltwater Tarn, as satellite fields. But, rarely do you find oil columns of the thickness of 2,000 or so feet. It's just unbelievable. Unbelievable, Jeff, perhaps, but unbelievable.
It is right.
Yeah, so, I was just overjoyed. And again, having looked at the data in seismic years ago, I just was happy they drilled it and wish I could claim it was mine, but I can't.
I was going to ask about, you looking at it years ago, and Did you have any inclination that it could be this? You know what I mean? Is there any part you thought this could be massive, or this, or is it even surprised you?
No, I thought this was actually one of the better prospects. But again, it went back to also, could we drill it across the river? There's some, at the time, sort of rig restrictions to make it work. And we were so far down the path on Elkade and Fecta and Talitha drilling those that we just, couldn't pivot and drill this particular prospect, at least the time I was there. So I always liked it as a prospect. Saw it as just very unusual, conventional trap that could be huge. But again, this has, I think, blown me away more than I originally thought it could be. It's just, again, 2,000 plus feet of light oil. It's just, you don't find that very often.
Well, for those listening in, I think we're just all sat with a smile on our faces, still slightly gobsmacked by this. Sporazene, what were your thoughts?
I'm just sort of sitting tight for the next month flight. I think we've got so much great news ahead of us potentially that I just don't want to jinx it. And wait for the next update. I would imagine there'll be some more details on the test program actually commencing. They've got the rig on hot standby there, so that shouldn't take too long. Get the crew back on the rig. I would imagine that'll be the next update that we get, potentially some more analysis from the very shallow zones that they found. I think they hinted to that in the RNS. So I'm just sitting tight here and really keeping everything crossed that the optimism that we've seen in writing, and of course through the interview that was done yesterday with Jay and Bob, which was absolutely fantastic to see them looking so happy, and hats off to them for the effort that they put into this. I would imagine they're probably feeling happier than we are right now with many years of hard work getting to this point for those guys. So a big congrats to them, I'm sure, from all the investors. But yeah, it's just a question of sitting tight here from my point of view and keeping everything crossed that we deliver what looks like could be a really great result.
In-flight announcement. Flight's investment server. Sharing industry insights for the good of all. If you'd like to be part of our investor community, and for more information about the topics discussed today, download the Discord app to your phone or computer, then use the invitation link to join, which you can find below.
Let me say one other thing. Again, it's a little different, Megrez, from the other prospects we've been drilling in the more recent past, is that this is going to be a conventional. And again, if the porosity, permeability, and oil quality is all kind of, as they say, you'll be looking at ways to do water flooding, possibly gas injection, municipal water alternating gas injection. There's all types of ways you can get good recovery factors out of this, way above sort of the 10% or plus or minus range that we're talking about for the tighter rock. So again, how you come up here, what's the gas oil ratio, how are you going to actually manage this field? Horizontal drilling is easy when you're talking about a 50 or 100 foot sand. You just kind of stay within that. Now you've got maybe 2,000 feet of all types of sands to play with. Is the current gravel pad big enough to do the type of development that this could actually become? This thing could really grow.
I'm definitely going to keep Jay Cheatham's words really sort of close at heart. If I start to get a little bit nervous, I think big oil fields get bigger and better over time. So I'm definitely going to be remembering that, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I've spoken to Justin and Hondris and David Hobbs kind of many times over the last few years, but I've never spoken to Bob or Jay, in fact.
No.
And so maybe we should invite them on, shouldn't we?
That'd be great.
That's going to be an editing nightmare flight, I can tell you. well, in 4 weeks with a nomad until we get it back, basically. So.
Yeah, for sure.
I think Sporazene, I kind of, you mentioned about you don't want to jinx it, and I think there is a point, and it probably reflected in the share price as well, that a lot of us are battle weary, and strangely, I'm finding my head is having to overrule my heart here, you know what I mean? Because of what you've been through before, the worry. But I mean, when you read it and you know what it looks like and you know what it's saying, but in a way you're scared to believe it, to be honest.
Well, let's touch on that. I mean, the market dynamics. It's a shame Unbelievable Jeff couldn't join tonight, but I did speak to him earlier, and we thought that it'd be really good to have an episode where we do just really do just chat about market dynamics. And a shout out to Brendan Long from Zeus Capital. We have reached out. I don't mind sharing that. We have reached out to Brendan. We hope to have him on. I thought that'd be really good to sort of look at some potential valuations of the company and just have a chat with an oil and gas analyst, and just to see how he sees this. And but we can just touch on it. I mean, we got the market reaction. We were kind of up. Started off up 15%, up 25%. Did it top out at about 25% up? And then last couple of days it settled back. And it's the old adage, isn't it, that traders are going to trade, regardless of the intrinsic value of what's been discovered in Megrez or as Pantheon as a company. But effectively, I think what we're hinting at here is Megrez itself is an out-and-out company maker, in my opinion. Lower break-evens, faster returns on deployed capital. Most likely, I don't know, are we really going there? We're saying most likely over 1 billion barrels of conventional production. But traders are going to trade, and there's no getting away from it. But for me, I guess the market is going to move towards true value. Actually, probably after flow testing, and just because we've said before on this podcast, ultimately physics wins. And it might be my simplistic investor overview, and I know there are market participants that can overrule things both to the upside and the downside, as we've all experienced in this investment, right? But it is difficult, isn't it, that emotional maturity when you're watching the share price rise, and everyone's getting giddy. And even if we've been at this a long time, as some of us have, we're all human. We still have that emotional response to what we're seeing. So I thought it would be good to talk to have just unbelievable Jeff on, as investment banker and venture capitalist, and also perhaps an oil industry analyst, to sort of talk us through the sort of cold facts, sort of to remove the emotion.
And it's a bit of a shame that we've not been able to get his opinion at it. We've talked a lot about the financing, and we're obviously still in a situation where that piece of the puzzle is not yet in place, and it's certainly a sort of core part of the bear argument, right? Intuitively feels to me like, are we in a better position now to raise the capital that we need through whatever means, non-dilutive equity, whatever, based on the results that we've had, or based on a successful outcome at Megrez? And I think it certainly feels to me like we're in a far stronger position now with what we've seen over the course of the last week with the progress on the gas line, the executive order. I think there's going to be a renaissance in the oil and gas industry in Alaska, and we are so ideally placed for that. I feel as though our ability to finance ourselves going forward in whatever form will become a lot easier than it was just 2 or 3 months ago. So until it's in place, you can't be complacent about this, but my sense is it's going to get a lot easier than it certainly was.
Yeah, and I think I'd take us back to what David Hobbs said, in as much that Pantheon are part of Alaska's future and a part of Alaska's thriving and part of the ecosystem. And it's not that it stops with us. I think we have to have a wider perspective that it is significant, and we, as you say, Sporazene, this resurgence in the industry, it looks like it's refilling the Alaska state coffers. And if you do get under the hood in terms of the sort of the tension in the legislative year on year, it's like fighting, budget cuts. And so ultimately what they call the PFD cuts are fiercely fought over, and it's a hot potato. But we're just part of the whole renaissance on the North Slope. Do you want to speak to that at all? How it feels on the ground?
Again, as you know, the pipeline is more or less had a capacity at one time of about 2 million barrels of oil per day. We're down around 500,000 barrels per day, plus or minus. Willow, Pika, things like that can grow, but they're never going to replace the Prudhoe Bay field as it came off decline. So it's, as you said, the state needs that oil and gas money to basically function. It's the Alaska Permanent Fund, PFD, helps out, all the residents of Alaska. Every year we get a check $1,000, $2,000, whatever. So it's nice to have. You don't see many states that actually give money back to their residents. Alaska is a bit different, kind of like Norway, gives money back to their equivalent of a permanent fund. So it's, this could be a big thing for the state. I think Mike Dunleavy, our governor, has acknowledged that he wants to be part of this process to kind of grow the economic viability of Alaska, and he's doing it.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, final comments, anyone?
I feel a bit sorry for the Kodiak and the other top sets now. We missed out 4 last time. We're almost missing them all out now. But, I think that'll be interesting to see how it develops because, I know the timelines were put out and there was the potential, obviously, pending on funding, which we've mentioned, but to drill Kodiak. But, I think this is such a game changer that, as you say, it's going to bring in the cash the quickest, basically. So I think we'll hear a lot more about Megrez and a Punis.
Well, it also makes you think about who's going to now want to get into a data room, look at this data, get excited to be a participant. Apache kind of partnered with Armstrong and through some of the acreage up in the far northeast of where we are. So I'm pretty sure people are going to be looking at this if this turns out to be as big as it is. How can they be a player? How could they possibly be the only player in this field?
Yeah, I think the general consensus is overall these resources are too big. Right? It's too big. Yeah. It has to be a multiple participant approach. So for me, the question is, I guess I had my own thesis, which was there's the 2 catalysts. There was drilling the Megrez well, and there was the Alaska Gasline. And if either one of those came to pass, then effectively, for me, in 2025, it puts Pantheon in play, which we'll wait and see. At which point, the intrinsic value, as we were talking earlier, the share price will start to move towards that. And as I say, I think it'd be good for us to have an episode where we do focus on the potential valuations, look at some discounted formulas, and just to start, I'll try and think of a funny feature we could do where we all sort of have a stab at, like you pin the tail on the donkey. We could all go bring our valuations, and we can have a stab at it and see what kind of asses we make of ourselves ultimately with our number crunching. So, but thanks guys for joining tonight. Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers, gents.
Thanks very much, gents.
Thank you from all the crew here at the Flight Deck, and hope to see you soon over at Flight's investment server, sharing industry insights for the good of all.